The $5,000 extortion demand should have been Maya Chen's breaking point. Instead, it was Vinnie Torino's first mistake. The scar-faced enforcer slammed his fist on Golden Dragon's counter, expecting another terrified immigrant to fold like origami. "Pay up or we shut you down," he snarled at Mr. Wang, who trembled behind the register. What Vinnie didn't know was that the quiet waitress refilling his coffee had spent 15 years mastering two deadly skills: forensic accounting and Krav Maga. Maya's chopsticks clinked against her apron as she calculated exactly how to destroy a criminal empire that collected millions from helpless businesses across Queens. Subscribe to see how one woman's hidden past becomes a mob family's worst nightmare. Because when you threaten the wrong person's chosen family, you don't just get served, you get completely dismantled, one financial record at a time. Maya Chen's alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., the same jarring buzz that had dragged her from sleep for the past 3 years. Her studio apartment in Elmhurst measured exactly 400 square feet, every inch calculated to justify the $1,800 monthly rent. The Murphy bed folded against the wall revealed a desk buried under CPA study guides and highlighted tax codes. Through thin walls, she heard Mrs. Rodriguez's television already broadcasting the morning news in Spanish, the familiar cadence of disaster and politics bleeding into Maya's consciousness. She dressed in the same black slacks and white button-down that served as both her Golden Dragon uniform and her armor against a world that saw only what she allowed them to see. The subway ride from Roosevelt Avenue to Main Street took exactly 23 minutes during morning rush. Maya stood pressed against the car door, studying the faces around her: construction workers heading to job sites, nurses finishing night shifts, students clutching coffee like lifelines. Each person carried their own weight, their own secrets, their own calculations of survival in a city that demanded everything and promised nothing. She recognized the micro-expressions of exhaustion, the subtle slouch of shoulders bearing invisible loads. These were her people, the ones who worked multiple jobs and counted every dollar, who understood that dignity was something you fought for every single day. Golden Dragon Restaurant occupied a narrow storefront on Northern Boulevard, squeezed between a check-cashing service and a 99-cent store. The red and gold facade had faded to dusty pink and tarnished brass, but the lunch crowd never seemed to notice. Maya pushed through the front door at exactly 7 a.m., breathing in the familiar blend of soy sauce, jasmine tea, and the industrial disinfectant Mr. Wang used to mop the floors. The dining room held 24 tables, each covered with red tablecloths that Maya had sewn herself during slow afternoons. Plastic flowers and cheap vases completed the decoration scheme, a careful balance between authenticity and economics that somehow worked. Mr. Wang emerged from the kitchen carrying a pot of tea, his movements deliberate despite his 72 years. His hands shook slightly as he poured, a tremor that had worsened over the past 6 months. Maya noticed everything: the way his eyes darted toward the front window every few minutes, how he fumbled with the cash register keys, the manila envelope tucked beneath the counter that appeared and disappeared on irregular schedules. She had learned observation as a survival skill, reading people and situations with the precision of someone who understood that missing details could prove dangerous. Today felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't identify but definitely didn't trust. The morning rush brought its usual parade of regulars: Detective Rodriguez ordering his coffee black with 2 sugars, construction workers splitting combination platters, nurses from Queens Hospital grabbing soup before their shifts. Maya moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates and remembering orders without writing anything down. Her NYU business degree hung in her apartment next to her accounting certification, but here she was, simply Maya the waitress, polite and forgettable. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was a choice, a strategy that had kept her safe for 3 years since she'd walked away from everything she used to be. During the lunch lull, Maya sat at table 12 with her own meal: steamed rice, vegetables, and the wooden chopsticks her father had carved from bamboo 30 years ago in their kitchen in Oakland. The wood had darkened with age and wear, smooth beneath her fingers like worry beads worn smooth by decades of handling. She ate slowly, methodically, the way he had taught her, with gratitude for each grain, with awareness of the hands that had planted and harvested and prepared the food before her. These chopsticks were the only physical reminder of him she allowed herself to keep, the only connection to a past she had carefully buried beneath layers of ordinary life. The afternoon brought an unusual stillness to Northern Boulevard. Traffic moved normally, but Maya noticed the same dark sedan parked across the street for the third consecutive day. Two men sat inside, one reading a newspaper that never seemed to turn pages, the other speaking into a phone with the kind of animated gestures that suggested urgent business. She wiped down tables and refilled soy sauce dispensers while tracking their presence in her peripheral vision. Mr. Wang had noticed them too. She could tell by the way he avoided looking directly out the front window, by the frequency of his trips to check the back door locks. At 4:15, the phone rang 3 times before falling silent. Mr. Wang's face went pale as he stared at the receiver. Maya pretended to organize menus while watching him retrieve the manila envelope from beneath the counter and thumb through its contents. Crisp bills in neat stacks. More cash than the restaurant typically saw in a week. He slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket and walked to the kitchen, leaving Maya alone in the dining room with questions she couldn't ask and observations she couldn't ignore. The wooden chopsticks lay beside her plate, silent witnesses to changes that felt inevitable and dangerous. Evening brought new customers and familiar rhythms, but underneath the ordinary surface of dinner service, Maya felt the weight of watching eyes and unspoken tensions. She served sweet and sour pork to a family celebrating a birthday, delivered hot tea to an elderly couple sharing 1-ton soup, processed credit cards, and made change with the same careful attention she brought to everything else. But part of her mind remained fixed on the manila envelope, the tremor in Mr. Wang's hands, and the dark sedan that had finally disappeared as the sun set over Queens. Her father's chopsticks rested in her apron pocket, a reminder of promises made and responsibilities inherited, of protection offered and received. The next morning brought rain and trouble in equal measure. Maya arrived at Golden Dragon to find Mr. Wang standing behind the counter with his shoulders rigid and his face carefully blank, the expression of a man bracing for impact. 3 men in expensive overcoats sat at table 6, their presence filling the small dining room like smoke from a grease fire. The largest man had silver hair slicked back with enough gel to reflect the overhead lights, and a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. His companions flanked him with the practiced ease of men accustomed to providing intimidation as a professional service. Maya tied her apron and approached the table with coffee and menus, her movements deliberately casual despite the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Up close, she could see that their suits cost more than she made in 6 months. Italian wool, hand-stitched buttonholes, shoes that probably required appointments to purchase. The scarred man looked up at her with eyes the color of winter sky, cold and calculating. When he spoke, his voice carried the remnants of a Brooklyn accent, polished smooth by decades of careful cultivation. "Coffee's fine, sweetheart. We're here to talk business with Wang." He gestured toward the kitchen with a hand that bore a gold ring set with what looked like a genuine ruby. "Been waiting to have this conversation for a while now. You understand how these things work, right? Neighborhood businesses, community relationships, mutual assistance." His smile revealed teeth that had been professionally straightened and whitened, the kind of dental work that spoke of serious money invested in appearances. Maya nodded and retreated to pour coffee, her ears tuned to catch every word of the conversation that followed. Mr. Wang emerged from the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel, the gesture automatic and nervous. The scarred man, who had introduced himself as Vinnie Torino, spread his business cards across the table like a dealer shuffling a deck. "Torino Family Consulting," he said, tapping the embossed logo with one manicured finger. "We specialize in community protection services. $5,000 a month, and your customers always feel safe eating here. Your suppliers never have delivery problems. Your permits never get held up in bureaucratic red tape." He paused to sip his coffee, his eyes never leaving Mr. Wang's face. "Reasonable investment in peace of mind, wouldn't you say?" Maya watched from behind the counter as Mr. Wang's face cycled through confusion, fear, and resignation. She had seen that expression before. The moment when someone realizes they're trapped in a situation with no good options, when the illusion of choice evaporates and leaves only survival calculations. Her hands moved automatically, wiping down the same section of counter over and over while her mind processed the implications of what she was witnessing. $5,000 represented almost half of Golden Dragon's monthly revenue. Money that would force Mr. Wang to choose between paying rent and paying employees. "I don't understand," Mr. Wang said, his English careful and precise despite the tremor in his voice. "We already pay taxes. We have insurance. Police patrol this street regularly." Vinny's companions exchanged looks that spoke of amusement and impatience in equal measure. One of them, a thin man with nervous fingers and expensive eyeglasses, pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be financial records. The other, built like a refrigerator with arms, simply stared at Mr. Wang with the blank expression of a man who solved problems through the application of physical force. Vinny leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly under his weight. "See, that's where you're confused, old man. This isn't about taxes or insurance or cops walking beats. This is about understanding how things really work in this neighborhood, about knowing who your friends are." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, identical to the one Maya had seen Mr. Wang handling the previous day. "We've already had this conversation with 15 other businesses on this street. Every single one of them saw the wisdom in our arrangement. Smart business owners don't like to be the exception that proves the rule." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar sensation she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The moment when observation transformed into action, when calculation gave way to commitment. She set down the coffee pot and walked toward table 6, her movements controlled and deliberate. 20 years of training had taught her to read violence in the set of shoulders, the positioning of hands, the quality of silence that preceded eruption. Vinny's companions were professionals, but they had grown comfortable in their authority, sloppy in their alertness. They didn't see her coming until she was already standing beside their table. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice carrying just enough authority to draw their attention without triggering defensive responses. "Is there a problem with the service today?" Mr. Wang is one of the most respected business owners in this community. His customers include police officers, nurses, teachers, construction workers, people who notice when their favorite restaurant suddenly becomes expensive or unsafe. She met Vinny's eyes directly, letting him see that she wasn't intimidated by his presence or his implications. "I'm sure you gentlemen understand the value of positive community relationships." Vinny's expression shifted from mild annoyance to active interest as he studied Maya's face. She could see him recalibrating, trying to determine whether she represented a threat or simply a foolish young woman who didn't understand the stakes of the game being played. After a moment that stretched like a held breath, he smiled again, but this time the expression carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "You know what, sweetheart? You're absolutely right about community relationships. That's exactly what we're here to establish." He stood slowly, his bulk casting a shadow across the table. "But maybe you don't understand all the ways a relationship can go wrong when people don't show proper appreciation for friendship." The slap came without warning, a casual backhand that should have sent Maya stumbling backward into the counter. Instead, she shifted her weight at the last possible second, letting Vinny's momentum carry him forward while she stepped aside with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years learning how to transform attack into opportunity. Vinny's hand met empty air, his balance disrupted by the unexpected absence of resistance. For exactly 3/10 of a second, Maya's body remembered every lesson her father had taught her about turning an opponent's strength against them. Then she forced herself to stumble backward, letting Vinny think his blow had found its mark while she absorbed the impact against the counter. Vinny looked down at his feet in confusion, as if trying to understand how he had ended up off balance when his target appeared to be exactly where his strike should have left her. Maya clutched the counter and widened her eyes, projecting the image of a frightened young woman who had been lucky enough to avoid the worst of his aggression. "I'm sorry," she said, letting her voice shake appropriately. "I didn't mean to interfere with your business." She retrieved Vinny's business card from where it had fallen to the floor, studying the embossed lettering and memorizing the phone number printed beneath the company logo. "I'll let you finish your conversation in private." As Maya retreated to the kitchen, she heard Vinny completing his transaction with Mr. Wang. Payment schedules, collection dates, consequences for late or missed payments explained in the matter-of-fact tone of a man discussing utility bills. She studied the business card while washing coffee cups, noting the Manhattan address, the professional typography, the subtle weight of the cardstock that suggested serious investment in legitimate appearances. Everything about Torino Family Consulting appeared legal and above board, which made it infinitely more dangerous than simple street-level thuggery. These were criminals who understood the value of bureaucracy, who had learned to weaponize paperwork and procedure. When the three men finally left Golden Dragon, they took something intangible but vital with them: the sense of safety that had made the restaurant a community gathering place, the belief that honest work could provide honest protection. Maya watched through the front window as they climbed into their black Escalade and drove away, already planning their next stop, their next conversation, their next extraction of tribute from people who couldn't afford to pay and couldn't afford to refuse. She fingered her father's chopsticks in her apron pocket and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to destroy Vinny Torino and everyone like him, using every skill she had spent 3 years trying to forget. Maya spent the next 3 days mapping Torino Family Consulting's operations with the methodical precision of an accountant preparing for an audit. She varied her routes to and from work, taking different subway lines and walking alternate paths through Queens, always keeping her movements casual while cataloging the businesses that displayed small window decals featuring the Torino logo, a stylized eagle clutching an olive branch. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Peace through strength, protection through submission. The kind of messaging that allowed people to pretend they weren't paying extortion fees, but rather investing in community services. By Thursday evening, she had counted 15 establishments between Northern Boulevard and Roosevelt Avenue that bore the mark of Torino's influence. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemical baths, details sharpening with each pass through the neighborhood. Chen's laundromat on 37th Avenue had installed new security cameras and hired a second employee despite the owner's previous complaints about rising costs. Nail Palace on Main Street suddenly offered expanded hours and premium services that seemed inconsistent with their previous bare-bones operation. Golden Star Grocery had replaced their aging refrigeration units with commercial-grade equipment that must have cost more than the store's annual profit. Each business showed signs of forced prosperity, the kind of improvements that suggested access to capital but also obligations that extended beyond normal commercial relationships. Maya positioned herself at different coffee shops and bus stops throughout the week, timing the movements of the black Escalades that made regular circuits through the affected areas. The vehicles appeared on Tuesdays and Fridays with clockwork regularity, stopping at each marked business for precisely 10 to 15 minutes before moving to the next location. She photographed license plates using her phone's camera, memorized faces, and noted the professional efficiency with which the collections were conducted. No raised voices, no visible threats, just businessmen conducting business with the kind of routine that spoke of well-established relationships and mutually understood expectations. On Friday afternoon, Maya followed one of the Escalades from a distance, riding the Q25 bus as it traced a route that paralleled the vehicle's progress through Flushing. The SUV made its final stop at an accounting office on Northern Boulevard, a narrow storefront squeezed between a travel agency and a cell phone repair shop. Through the plate glass window, she could see generic office furniture and motivational posters about teamwork and success, the kind of bland corporate decor that suggested either genuine mediocrity or carefully constructed camouflage. A small placard beside the door read, "Queensborough Financial Services, Accounting, Tax Preparation, Business Consulting." Maya memorized the address and walked past without slowing, filing the information away for future investigation. That evening, Maya sat in her studio apartment with her laptop open and her father's chopsticks resting beside the keyboard like ancient instruments waiting to guide modern work. She began with simple internet searches, tracing the digital footprints of the businesses she had identified. Public record searches through the New York State Department of State revealed incorporation documents, registered addresses, and filing histories that painted a picture of recent activity and rapid expansion. Torino Family Consulting had been incorporated 18 months earlier with an address that matched a UPS store location in Flushing. Queensborough Financial Services shared the same incorporation attorney and had been established 6 weeks later with similar paperwork and identical formatting. The deeper Maya dug into public financial records, the more obvious the pattern became. Each of the 15 businesses had amended their tax filings within the past year to include consulting fees as a new expense category. The amounts varied but averaged approximately $5,000 monthly, exactly the figure Vinny had quoted to Mr. Wang. More interesting was the consistency of payment dates. Every business made their consulting payments on the same 2 days each month, suggesting centralized collection and processing. Maya cross-referenced the payment schedules with banking holidays and business days, building a timeline that revealed the mechanical precision of the operation. Corporate filings for Queensborough Financial Services listed Maria Santos as the principal accountant and registered agent. Maya searched social media platforms and professional networking sites until she found Santos's profile, a woman in her mid-40s with a master's degree in accounting from St. John's University and 20 years of experience in small business financial management. Her client testimonials emphasized discretion, efficiency, and expertise in complex regulatory compliance issues. Maya noted that Santos had worked for several law firms specializing in immigration and family court before establishing her independent practice. The combination of accounting skills and legal system familiarity suggested someone who understood how to navigate bureaucracy while maintaining plausible deniability. Sunday morning brought Maya to the Queens Central Library on Merrick Boulevard, where she settled into a corner desk with access to databases unavailable through simple internet searches. Using her library card and guest access credentials, she pulled corporate credit reports, property records, and business license applications for the entire network of Torino-affiliated enterprises. The picture that emerged was even more sophisticated than she had anticipated. Shell companies layered within holding companies, property ownership transferred through limited liability partnerships, and financial flows designed to obscure source and destination through multiple intermediary accounts. Maya discovered that Queensborough Development Corporation, a separate entity from the accounting office but sharing the same incorporation attorney, had recently submitted plans for a $50 million casino and entertainment complex on property currently zoned for light industrial use. The project required approval from the Queensborough Board, the New York State Gaming Commission, and the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs due to tribal partnership agreements. Construction contracts had already been awarded to companies that shared board members with other Torino entities, creating a web of financial relationships that would channel profits through the same network currently collecting protection payments from local businesses. The casino project represented the true scope of Vinny's ambitions. The monthly collections from small businesses weren't just extortion. They were seed capital for a much larger operation, a way to establish cash flow and community influence while positioning for a massive payday that would dwarf the current protection racket. Maya calculated that if the casino project moved forward as planned, Torino and his associates would control the largest entertainment venue in Queens, with opportunities for money laundering, loan sharking, and political influence that would make their current activities look like practice rounds. As Maya packed her research materials and prepared to leave the library, she noticed a man in a gray suit reading a newspaper 3 tables away from her workstation. He had been there when she arrived 4 hours earlier, and his newspaper hadn't turned a single page during that entire time. When Maya stood to return her reference books to the circulation desk, Gray Suit folded his paper and walked toward the exit, timing his movement to stay consistently 20 feet behind her. Maya took a deliberately circuitous route through the library stacks, confirming that her shadow maintained his distance while pretending to browse periodicals and computer terminals. Outside the library, Maya boarded the first bus that arrived, the Q44 heading toward Jamaica, and watched through the rear window as Gray Suit climbed into a sedan parked across the street. The vehicle followed the bus for 6 stops before turning onto a side street and disappearing into traffic. Maya rode the bus to its terminus and then took the subway back to Elmhurst, changing trains twice and doubling back through Penn Station to ensure she wasn't being tracked. The surveillance confirmed what her research had suggested. Torino's organization was large enough and sophisticated enough to monitor potential threats, which meant Maya had already crossed a line from observer to participant in whatever conflict was brewing beneath the surface of Queens community life. That night, Maya sat on her fire escape with her laptop balanced on her knees and her father's chopsticks resting on the windowsill like sentries keeping watch. The wooden implements caught streetlight from Northern Boulevard, their familiar weight and texture grounding her in purpose, while her mind raced through implications and possibilities. She had spent 3 years building a quiet life, a safe life, a life where her skills remained hidden and her past stayed buried. But Vinnie Torino had made that impossible the moment he walked into Golden Dragon and threatened the only family she had left. Now she would use every lesson her father had taught her, about observation, about patience, about turning an opponent's strength into their weakness, to bring down an organization that had forgotten the most important rule of all. Never underestimate the person serving your coffee. Maya's transformation from waitress to financial investigator began at 4 a.m. on Monday morning, 2 hours before her usual shift at Golden Dragon. She had requisitioned a corner table at an all-night diner on Roosevelt Avenue, spreading accounting textbooks and legal pads across the surface like a student preparing for comprehensive exams. The reality was far more dangerous. She was building a case that could either destroy a criminal organization or get her killed in the process. Her father's chopsticks lay beside her coffee cup, silent reminders that some fights were worth the risk of everything you had worked to build. The first breakthrough came through cross-referencing federal tax identification numbers with New York State business registrations. Maya had learned during her NYU coursework that every legitimate business entity required an employer identification number issued by the Internal Revenue Service, and these 9-digit codes served as fingerprints that could trace financial relationships across multiple jurisdictions. Using the library's database access, she pulled EIN records for Torino Family Consulting, Queensborough Financial Services, and the 15 businesses she had identified as protection clients. The pattern that emerged was both elegant and damning. Every payment flow led back to 3 central processing accounts controlled by a single entity that existed only on paper. Maya spent Tuesday morning at the Queens County Clerk's office on Sutphin Boulevard, navigating the bureaucratic maze required to access commercial property records and business license applications. The clerk who assisted her, a tired woman named Patricia with 30 years of civil service experience, seemed genuinely surprised by Maya's thorough knowledge of filing systems and legal terminology. "You work for a law firm?" Patricia asked as Maya requested specific document types using precise legal language. "Accounting firm," Maya replied, which was technically true if you counted her one-person investigation as a consulting business. "I'm helping a client understand some complex ownership structures. The property records revealed layers of corporate shell games that would have impressed legitimate tax attorneys. Torino's network had purchased 7 commercial properties in Queens over the past 18 months, using limited liability companies registered in Delaware and financed through loans from banks that specialized in commercial real estate development. Each purchase had been structured to minimize tax liability while maximizing depreciation benefits, the kind of sophisticated planning that required professional expertise and substantial legal fees. Maya photographed relevant documents using her phone's camera, building a digital archive of evidence that traced money flows from street-level collections to high-level investment strategies. Wednesday brought Maya to the Federal Building in Manhattan, where she navigated the public access to court electronic records system using visitor credentials and her student identification from NYU. Pacer database searches revealed that Queensborough Development Corporation was currently party to 6 federal lawsuits related to environmental impact assessments, zoning variances, and tribal gaming compact negotiations. The litigation filings contained detailed financial disclosures, corporate organization charts, and sworn affidavits that provided Maya with information the defendants probably never intended to make public. She printed relevant documents and highlighted sections that contradicted the financial statements filed with New York State regulatory agencies, The smoking gun emerged from an unexpected source: employee payroll records accidentally included in a zoning variance application. Maya discovered that Maria Santos, the accountant who processed collections for 15 separate businesses, was simultaneously employed by Queensborough Financial Services, Torino Family Consulting, and Queensborough Development Corporation. Her salary was being paid through 3 different accounts, but the payment schedules and amounts suggested coordination that violated federal laws regarding corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility. More damning was the revelation that Santos had access to bank routing information and signature authority for accounts that officially belonged to businesses she had never been hired to represent. Maya spent Thursday afternoon in the basement archives of the Queens District Attorney's Office, researching similar cases and studying the legal frameworks that federal prosecutors use to pursue organized crime charges. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act provided a powerful tool for targeting criminal enterprises that operated across multiple businesses and jurisdictions. But RICO prosecutions required evidence of pattern activity spanning at least 2 years. Maya calculated that Torino's network had been operational for 18 months, close to the threshold but potentially insufficient for federal charges unless she could prove the conspiracy had deeper historical roots. Friday morning brought a breakthrough that changed everything Maya thought she understood about the scope of Torino's operation. While researching construction permits for the proposed casino project, she discovered that Queensborough Development Corporation had received a preliminary loan commitment for $47 million from Meridian Capital Trust, a financial institution that specialized in tribal gaming ventures and resort development. The loan documents included detailed projections for revenue streams, employment levels, and community economic impact that painted the casino as a transformative development for Queens. Maya cross-referenced the construction timeline with collection schedules from protection clients and realized that the monthly payments were being used to demonstrate consistent cash flow to potential lenders. The financial engineering was breathtaking in its sophistication. Torino's organization was using extortion payments from small businesses to establish creditworthiness for legitimate banking relationships, essentially laundering street-level crime into institutional investment capital. The casino project would provide massive returns that could be used to expand operations throughout New York City, creating a criminal empire with the financial resources and political influence to challenge law enforcement at every level. Maya understood that she was looking at a business model that could revolutionize organized crime, if allowed to succeed. Maya's weekend research session focused on identifying vulnerabilities in Torino's financial structure. Every sophisticated money laundering scheme contained weak points where legitimate banking regulations intersected with criminal cash flows, creating opportunities for detection and interdiction. She studied federal banking compliance requirements, anti-money laundering protocols, and suspicious activity reporting procedures that banks were required to follow when handling large cash transactions. Maya discovered that businesses making regular cash deposits above $10,000 triggered automated reporting to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a federal agency that tracked potential money laundering activities. The key insight came from analyzing deposit patterns at the 3 banks that processed payments for Torino's network. Each protection client made monthly payments of exactly $4,999, $1 below the threshold that would trigger enhanced scrutiny from federal banking regulators. The precision was too consistent to be coincidental. Someone with detailed knowledge of banking regulations had structured the entire collection system to avoid detection. Maya calculated that the network was processing approximately $75,000 monthly, while maintaining individual transaction amounts that appeared legitimate to automated monitoring systems. Sunday evening found Maya in her apartment, surrounded by printed documents, legal pads filled with calculations, and her laptop displaying financial spreadsheets that would have impressed forensic accountants at the FBI. She had built a case file that connected street-level extortion to federal banking fraud, linked small business victimization to large-scale money laundering, and demonstrated how organized crime was evolving to exploit legitimate financial institutions. The evidence was comprehensive, methodical, and devastating. But it was also dangerous enough to get her killed if Torino's organization discovered her investigation. Maya picked up her father's chopsticks and held them while reviewing her work, feeling their familiar weight and remembering his lessons about patience, preparation, and the importance of striking at exactly the right moment. She had spent 4 days building a case that could destroy Torino's entire operation, but presenting the evidence would require allies with the authority to act on her discoveries. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous phase of her investigation, finding someone within the system who had the courage and competence to take on an organization that had spent 18 months learning how to make crime look like commerce. The waitress from Golden Dragon was about to become a federal informant, and Maya Chen was finally ready to stop hiding from who she used to be. Maya requested a meeting with Anthony Torino through channels that demonstrated her understanding of how serious people conducted serious business. She called the number on Vinny's business card at exactly 9 a.m. on Monday morning and spoke with a receptionist who sounded like she had been trained to handle unusual requests with professional discretion. "I have information that Mr. Anthony Torino needs to hear regarding his family's business interests in Queens," Maya said, using language that conveyed substance without specifics. "My name is Maya Chen. I work at Golden Dragon Restaurant, and I believe Mr. Torino will find our conversation mutually beneficial." The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 2 p.m. in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, near the Unisphere Monument, where conversations could be conducted with appropriate privacy. Maya spent Tuesday finalizing her presentation materials and preparing for a confrontation that would either resolve the situation through negotiation or escalate it beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. She organized her evidence into 3 categories: financial crimes that exposed Torino's organization to federal prosecution, business practices that violated New York State racketeering statutes, and banking relationships that could be severed through regulatory action. Each category included specific dollar amounts, dates, and documentation that would be difficult to dismiss as speculation or misunderstanding. Maya printed 20 pages of supporting materials and sealed them in a manila envelope that would serve as her insurance policy if the meeting went badly. Wednesday afternoon brought unseasonably warm weather to Queens, the kind of early spring day that reminded Maya why she had chosen to build her new life in New York, despite the cost and complexity of urban survival. Flushing Meadows Corona Park stretched across more than 1,000 acres of reclaimed marshland, offering walking paths, recreational facilities, and the kind of open spaces where private conversations could be conducted without concern about surveillance or interruption. Maya arrived 30 minutes early and positioned herself on a bench with clear sight lines in all directions, watching for signs that the meeting might be an ambush rather than a negotiation. Anthony Torino arrived precisely on time, accompanied by 2 men who positioned themselves at strategic intervals around the Unisphere while maintaining the casual demeanor of tourists enjoying an afternoon in the park. Torino himself was younger than Maya had expected, perhaps 45 years old, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of expensive casual wear that suggested confidence in his personal security. He approached her bench with the measured pace of someone accustomed to controlling the rhythm of important conversations, his hands visible and his expression carefully neutral as he assessed the woman who had requested this unprecedented meeting. "Miss Chen," Torino said as he settled onto the bench beside her, maintaining appropriate distance while positioning himself to observe her reactions. "I have to admit, your call surprised me. In my line of work, most problems get resolved through established channels. Direct approaches like yours usually indicate either exceptional courage or exceptional stupidity." He studied her face with the clinical attention of someone who had spent decades reading people for signs of deception or weakness. "My nephew Vinny thinks you're just a waitress who got lucky when he slipped on your restaurant floor. I'm beginning to think there's more to the story." Maya opened her manila envelope and withdrew a single sheet of paper, a financial summary that demonstrated her knowledge of Torino's operations without revealing the full scope of her investigation. "Your organization has collected $375,000 from small businesses in Queens over the past 18 months, she said, handing him the document. "Every payment has been processed through accounts controlled by Maria Santos at Queensborough Financial Services. The money is being used to establish creditworthiness for a $47 million casino development loan from Meridian Capital Trust. Your nephew may think I'm just a waitress, but I have a business degree from NYU and 3 years of experience in forensic accounting." Torino studied the financial summary with the attention it deserved, his expression revealing nothing while his mind processed implications and possibilities. Maya watched him calculate the potential damage that her knowledge could inflict on his carefully constructed empire, saw him weighing options that ranged from negotiation to elimination. After several minutes of silence, broken only by distant traffic and children playing on nearby recreational equipment, he folded the paper and returned it to her. "Impressive work," he said finally. "Professional quality analysis. Now tell me what you want." Maya had rehearsed this moment until her presentation flowed with the precision of a closing argument in federal court. "I want you to stop collecting protection payments from the 15 businesses currently under your control. I want you to return $500,000 to establish a community development fund administered by the Queens Borough President's Office. I want your organization to relocate its operations outside of Queens County within 30 days. She met his eyes directly, letting him see that she understood the stakes of what she was proposing. "In return, I'll keep my evidence confidential and allow your casino project to proceed without interference from federal investigators who might find my research interesting." Torino's laugh was genuine but not particularly friendly. The sound of someone who appreciated audacity even when it threatened his livelihood. "You know what I like about you, Miss Chen? You negotiate like someone who understands consequences. Most people in your position would threaten to go to the police without thinking through what happens next." He gestured toward his associates, who had maintained their positions around the monument while giving the appearance of casual park visitors. "But you're smart enough to realize that cooperation works better than confrontation, especially when everyone involved has something valuable to protect." Maya had anticipated his response and prepared accordingly. "I've already provided copies of my research to 3 different parties," she said, retrieving a second document from her envelope. "A criminal defense attorney who specializes in federal racketeering cases, an investigative journalist who covers organized crime for the New York Times, and a contact within the Federal Bureau of Investigation who handles financial crimes in the Eastern District of New York. They've been instructed to release the information if I fail to check in according to a predetermined schedule." She handed him a list of names and contact information that proved she wasn't bluffing about her preparations. Torino's demeanor shifted as he read the names on Maya's list, his casual confidence replaced by the focused attention of someone recognizing a genuine threat to his organization's survival. Maya watched him process the implications of federal scrutiny, media exposure, and legal challenges that could destroy everything he had spent 18 months building. She could see him calculating the cost of compliance versus the risk of escalation, weighing the certainty of short-term losses against the possibility of catastrophic long-term consequences. The silence stretched between them like a bridge that could either support negotiation or collapse into warfare. 30 days isn't enough time to relocate established business relationships, Torino said finally, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone who had moved from evaluation to planning. "Some of our clients have contracts that extend through the end of the fiscal year. Moving operations without proper transition planning would create unnecessary disruption for everyone involved." Maya recognized the language of someone buying time to develop alternative strategies. But she also heard the acknowledgement that her terms were being considered rather than dismissed outright. Maya had expected requests for modifications and had prepared reasonable responses that demonstrated her willingness to negotiate details while maintaining firm positions on fundamental requirements. 60 days for complete transition, with collections suspended immediately and community fund payments beginning within 2 weeks, she offered. Your existing clients can be transferred to legitimate business consulting services that don't involve protection payments. The casino project can proceed as planned, but without using extortion proceeds to support loan applications. She retrieved her father's chopsticks from her jacket pocket and held them while speaking, drawing strength from their familiar weight and texture. Torino noticed the chopsticks and seemed to understand their significance, his expression showing the first hint of respect for something beyond Maya's intelligence and preparation. "Family heirloom?" he asked, and when Maya nodded, he continued. "I understand the importance of honoring the people who taught us how to survive in a complicated world." My grandfather came to this country with nothing but determination and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to provide for his family. Sometimes those lessons conflict with other people's ideas about right and wrong. He studied Maya's face as he spoke, looking for signs that she might understand the moral complexity of their situation. Maya felt a moment of unexpected sympathy for Torino's position, recognizing the genuine pride and family loyalty that motivated his criminal enterprise. But her father's lessons about justice and protection extended beyond personal relationships to community responsibility, and she couldn't allow emotional complexity to compromise her mission. "I understand family obligations," she said quietly, "but protecting your family shouldn't require destroying other people's families. Every business owner you've intimidated has children who depend on their success, parents who need their support, communities that benefit from their prosperity." She stood from the bench and prepared to end the meeting, giving Torino time to consider her terms without pressure or additional threats. Torino remained seated while Maya gathered her materials, his silence indicating deep consideration rather than dismissal of her proposals. As she prepared to walk away, he spoke without looking at her, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would affect dozens of people and millions of dollars in business relationships. "I'll give you an answer within 48 hours, he said. "But understand that if you've miscalculated any aspect of this situation, the consequences will extend far beyond our two families. Some problems can't be solved through negotiation, no matter how well-researched your arguments might be." Maya nodded her understanding and walked toward the park exit, knowing that the next 2 days would determine whether her investigation had prevented a war or guaranteed one. 48 hours passed without word from Anthony Torino, but Maya understood that silence often spoke louder than promises or threats. Thursday morning brought unexpected visitors to Golden Dragon. 2 men in federal agent windbreakers who flashed immigration and customs enforcement badges while requesting to inspect employment records and worker documentation. Mr. Wang's hands shook as he retrieved personnel files, his eyes meeting Maya's with the helpless expression of someone who recognized retaliation when it arrived wearing official credentials. Maya served coffee to the agents while memorizing their badge numbers and noting the careful precision with which they photographed documents that had been perfectly legal 24 hours earlier. The ICS inspection lasted 3 hours and concluded with citations for minor paperwork discrepancies that could result in substantial fines pending administrative review. Maya watched the agents seal Mr. Wang's employment records in evidence bags while explaining the appeals process in language designed to emphasize complexity rather than clarity. "Federal immigration compliance is a serious responsibility," the lead agent explained with the practiced tone of someone who delivered similar speeches multiple times daily. "Business owners who fail to maintain proper documentation create security risks that affect the entire community." Maya understood the subtext. This was Anthony Torino's answer to her ultimatum, delivered through channels that demonstrated his organization's reach into legitimate government agencies. Friday afternoon brought the second wave of retaliation in the form of a surprise visit from the New York State Department of Health. 2 inspectors arrived with clipboards and authority to conduct a comprehensive food safety audit that could result in immediate closure if violations were discovered. Maya watched them examine refrigeration temperatures, sanitization procedures, and employee hygiene protocols, with the methodical attention of people looking for reasons to issue citations rather than ensuring public safety. They found minor violations that had been overlooked during previous inspections: a thermometer reading 2 degrees outside acceptable range, a hand-washing station that lacked proper signage, expired permits that were technically still within grace periods for renewal. Maya realized that Torino's response represented sophisticated understanding of how government bureaucracy could be weaponized against small businesses that lacked resources to challenge official actions. Rather than using direct violence, his organization was applying pressure through regulatory agencies that could destroy Golden Dragon's operations while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement. The strategy was elegant and effective. Business owners facing federal immigration investigations and health department violations couldn't afford the time or money required to fight multiple bureaucratic battles simultaneously while maintaining daily operations necessary for survival. Sunday evening found Maya in her studio apartment making 3 phone calls that would either save Golden Dragon or escalate the conflict beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. Her first call went to Catherine Mills, an assistant United States attorney in the Eastern District of New York who specialized in organized crime prosecutions and had a reputation for aggressive pursuit of RICO cases. Maya identified herself as a confidential informant with information about a racketeering conspiracy operating in Queens and requested a meeting to discuss evidence that could support federal charges. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and concluded with an appointment scheduled for Tuesday morning at the federal courthouse in Central Islip. Maya's second call went to Detective Luis Rodriguez, the Queens police officer who ate breakfast at Golden Dragon 3 times weekly, and had mentioned his assignment to a financial crimes task force that investigated money laundering operations. She explained that she had uncovered evidence of a protection racket targeting immigrant businesses and suggested that local law enforcement might want to coordinate with federal authorities who were developing related cases. Rodriguez listened with professional attention and agreed to review any evidence she could provide, noting that the NYPD had been tracking suspicious patterns in several Queens neighborhoods without identifying the source of the activity. The third call was the most dangerous. Maya contacted investigative journalist Sarah Chen at the New York Times, a reporter who had written extensively about organized crime's evolution from traditional mob families to sophisticated financial enterprises that exploited legitimate business structures. Maya provided enough information to demonstrate the scope of Torino's operations while withholding details that could compromise her safety if the conversation was monitored. Chen scheduled an interview for Wednesday afternoon and explained her newspaper's protocols for protecting confidential sources who provided information about criminal organizations. Tuesday morning brought Maya to the federal courthouse in Central Islip, where she navigated security checkpoints and bureaucratic procedures that reminded her of airport terminals designed by people who prioritized control over convenience. AUSA Catherine Mills turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with the focused intensity of someone who had spent 15 years prosecuting cases that mattered more than win-loss statistics. Maya spent 4 hours presenting her evidence, walking through financial records and explaining the connections between street-level extortion and federal banking crimes that could support charges under multiple statutes. Mills listened with the professional skepticism of someone who evaluated criminal cases based on evidence quality rather than dramatic narratives, asking detailed questions about document sources, witness availability, and corroboration possibilities that would be required for successful prosecution. Maya's forensic accounting background proved invaluable as she explained money flow patterns, banking compliance violations, and the sophisticated structure of Torino's money laundering operation. "This is federal case material," Mills concluded after reviewing Maya's documentation. "RICO conspiracy, bank fraud, money laundering, we could pursue this under multiple theories. But we'll need your cooperation as a witness, which means your safety becomes a federal law enforcement priority." Maya left the courthouse with mixed feelings about crossing the line from investigator to federal witness, understanding that her decision would provide protection while simultaneously making her a permanent target for retaliation. She spent Tuesday afternoon consulting with a criminal defense attorney who specialized in witness protection cases, learning about the legal procedures and personal security measures that would govern her life if she proceeded with federal prosecution. The attorney's advice was sobering. Testifying against organized crime required commitment to a process that could take years and would fundamentally change her relationship with Queens, Golden Dragon, and the community she had worked to protect. Wednesday afternoon's interview with Sarah Chen took place at a coffee shop in Astoria, chosen for its location away from Queens neighborhoods where Maya might be recognized by Torino's associates. Chen proved to be a methodical reporter who understood the difference between sensational headlines and substantive investigation, asking questions that demonstrated her familiarity with federal racketeering law and organized crime prosecution strategies. Maya provided enough information to support a preliminary article while withholding details that could compromise the federal investigation, walking the careful line between transparency and security that characterized her new reality as an informant. Thursday morning brought Maya to Golden Dragon early, arriving to find the restaurant's front window decorated with graffiti that hadn't been there the previous evening. Someone had spray-painted "Rats Get Exterminated" in block letters across the glass, using red paint that looked uncomfortably similar to blood in the early morning light. Maya photographed the vandalism before calling the police, understanding that the message represented escalation from bureaucratic harassment to direct intimidation. She cleaned the window while waiting for officers to arrive, using her father's lessons about maintaining dignity under pressure to transform vandalism into an opportunity for community solidarity. Detective Rodriguez arrived within 30 minutes and spent an hour documenting the vandalism while asking questions that revealed his growing understanding of the larger pattern Maya had described during their phone conversation. "This fits with intelligence we've been developing about protection rackets in immigrant business districts," he explained while photographing the graffiti. "Federal task force has been looking for exactly this kind of evidence to support broader investigations. Your willingness to come forward could break open cases we've been building for months." Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling around her shoulders like a heavy coat, understanding that her investigation had evolved beyond personal protection into community-wide law enforcement action. Friday afternoon brought the confrontation Maya had been anticipating since her meeting with Anthony Torino in Flushing Meadows Park. Vinny arrived at Golden Dragon with 2 associates, ostensibly for lunch, but actually to deliver a message that couldn't be misunderstood by anyone present. He ordered the most expensive items on the menu and left a $100 tip, performing generosity while his eyes promised violence. "Heard you've been having some regulatory problems lately," he said as Maya served his coffee. "Immigration issues, health department citations, the kind of bureaucratic headaches that can destroy a small business if they're not handled properly." Maya set down the coffee pot and met Vinny's stare with the calm expression of someone who had moved beyond fear into acceptance of whatever consequences her choices might bring. "The federal government takes regulatory compliance very seriously," she replied, using language that conveyed her understanding of the larger forces now involved in their conflict. "When businesses operate according to legal standards, they don't usually face the kind of scrutiny that's been happening lately. But when criminal organizations try to intimidate legitimate enterprises, that attracts attention from agencies with significant investigative resources." She could see Vinny processing her words, recognizing the implicit threat while calculating his response. Vinny stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with enough force to draw attention from other customers. "You know what your problem is, sweetheart? You don't understand how things work in the real world. You think having a college degree makes you smart enough to play games with people who have been solving problems since before you learned to tie your shoes." He stepped closer to Maya, using his size advantage to project intimidation while remaining just within the boundaries of behavior that could be explained as aggressive conversation rather than criminal threat. "Some lessons can only be learned through experience, and I'm thinking you're about to get educated." Maya felt her father's training activate in the space between heartbeats, her body shifting into the balanced stance that preceded either defensive action or offensive strike. 20 years of martial arts instruction had taught her to read violence in muscle tension, breathing patterns, and the subtle weight shifts that indicated imminent attack. Vinny was positioning himself for physical confrontation, confident that his size and reputation would intimidate a restaurant worker into submission. What he didn't understand was that Maya Chen had spent 15 years learning how to turn an opponent's confidence into their weakness, and she was finally ready to stop pretending to be helpless. The federal grand jury returned its indictment on a rainy Tuesday morning in late April, delivering 18 counts of racketeering conspiracy, money laundering, and extortion against Anthony Torino and 7 associates, including his nephew Vinny. Maya received the news through a phone call from Muse Catherine Mills, who explained that the investigation had expanded beyond Queens to include similar operations in Brooklyn and the Bronx based on financial patterns Maya's research had helped identify. The scope of the criminal enterprise surprised even federal prosecutors. 43 businesses across 3 boroughs had been paying protection money to an organization that collected over $2 million annually, while maintaining the facade of legitimate consulting services. Maya testified before the grand jury on Wednesday, spending 6 hours walking federal prosecutors through the evidence she had compiled during her investigation. The jury room felt like a corporate boardroom, with 23 citizens listening attentively as she explained money flow diagrams, banking compliance violations, and the sophisticated structure Torino had created to launder extortion proceeds into legitimate investment capital. Maya's forensic accounting background proved invaluable as she translated complex financial crimes into language that ordinary people could understand, demonstrating how street-level intimidation connected to federal banking fraud through carefully constructed corporate entities. The arrests began Thursday morning with coordinated raids across Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan that involved over 100 federal agents from the FBI, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and Homeland Security investigations. Maya watched the news coverage from her apartment, seeing footage of Anthony Torino being led from his Whitestone home in handcuffs while federal agents carried boxes of financial records to waiting vehicles. Vinny's arrest outside a restaurant in Little Italy provided particularly satisfying television, especially when he slipped on wet pavement while attempting to project defiance for assembled reporters and photographers. Asset forfeiture proceedings began immediately, with federal marshals seizing bank accounts, real estate holdings, and luxury vehicles purchased with proceeds from the racketeering conspiracy. Maya learned that the government had frozen over $3 million in assets, including the accounts that Torino had planned to use for casino development financing. Meridian Capital Trust withdrew its loan commitment within 24 hours of the indictments, effectively ending the casino project that had motivated much of the criminal activity. The financial impact extended beyond direct seizures to include canceled contracts, severed business relationships, and the collapse of legitimate enterprises that had unknowingly facilitated money laundering operations. Maya's role as the primary witness required ongoing cooperation with federal prosecutors who were building cases against defendants at multiple organizational levels. She spent Friday afternoon with FBI agents, identifying financial records seized during the raids and explaining their significance to the broader conspiracy. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, who supervised the financial crimes investigation, expressed amazement at the quality of Maya's initial research. Professional forensic accountants with 20 years of experience couldn't have done better analysis, Walsh explained. Your work provided the roadmap that made everything else possible. These guys thought they were invisible, but you made them completely transparent. The community impact of the arrests became evident over the weekend as business owners throughout Queens began speaking publicly about their experiences with Torino's organization. Maya watched television interviews where restaurant owners, shopkeepers, and service providers described years of intimidation, excessive payments, and the constant fear that had characterized their daily operations. Mr. Wang appeared on a Spanish-language news program, explaining through a translator how the protection payments had forced him to choose between paying employees and maintaining basic services. His relief was visible as he described the federal government's commitment to ensuring the safety of witnesses and victims. Monday morning brought Maya to a different kind of meeting. The first session of the Queens Small Business Recovery Commission, established by federal authorities to distribute restitution payments to victims of the racketeering conspiracy. Maya had been appointed to serve as community liaison, using her accounting expertise to evaluate claims and ensure that recovered assets reached the people who had been most harmed by Torino's operations. The commission included representatives from immigrant advocacy organizations, small business associations, and community development groups that understood the cultural and economic factors that had made certain neighborhoods vulnerable to organized crime. The restitution process required careful documentation of each victim's losses, including not only direct payments to Torino's organization, but also secondary costs such as increased insurance premiums, security equipment, and professional services required to comply with bureaucratic harassment. Maya spent Tuesday reviewing financial records submitted by 43 businesses, calculating damages that totaled over $800,000 in direct payments, plus additional costs that pushed the total impact above $1 million. The federal court had approved a streamlined claims process that would distribute initial payments within 60 days, with additional compensation available as more assets were recovered through ongoing litigation. Maya's own compensation came in an unexpected form. The FBI offered her a position as a financial crimes consultant, providing expertise for investigations involving sophisticated money laundering schemes and organized crime enterprises that exploited legitimate business structures. The work would allow her to continue living in Queens while applying her forensic accounting skills to cases with national significance, protecting communities across the country from criminal organizations that had learned to weaponize bureaucracy and regulatory compliance. Maya accepted the position with the understanding that she would maintain her connection to Golden Dragon and the community that had shaped her investigation. Thursday afternoon brought Maya to federal court for Anthony Torino's sentencing hearing, where she delivered a victim impact statement that emphasized the community-wide effects of organized crime rather than focusing on her personal experience. She explained how protection rackets undermined the social trust that allowed immigrant communities to build successful businesses, describing the psychological toll of constant intimidation and the economic burden of paying tribute to criminals who contributed nothing to community prosperity. Judge Patricia Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, listened with obvious attention as Maya connected individual crimes to broader patterns of exploitation that threatened the foundation of legitimate commerce. Anthony Torino received a 12-year federal prison sentence plus restitution orders totaling $2.3 million. Effectively ending his criminal career while ensuring substantial compensation for his victims. Vinny was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison followed by deportation to Italy, where outstanding warrants related to organized crime activities would result in additional imprisonment. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years, with most agreeing to cooperate with ongoing investigations in exchange for reduced punishment. Maya watched the proceedings with the satisfaction of someone who had seen justice delivered through proper channels rather than street violence. Friday evening brought Maya to the reopening celebration at Golden Dragon, where Mr. Wang had used his restitution payment to renovate the dining room and expand the menu to include dishes from his childhood in Taiwan. The restaurant was packed with community members, federal agents, local politicians, and reporters who had covered the investigation from its beginning. Maya moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and thanks, but her attention was focused on the subtle changes that indicated a community beginning to heal from years of systematic intimidation. Business owners spoke openly about their plans for expansion. Employees discussed opportunities for advancement, and families talked about futures that no longer included the constant fear of criminal retaliation. The evening's highlight came when Mayor Adams arrived to deliver remarks about the importance of community cooperation in fighting organized crime. He specifically recognized Maya's courage in coming forward with information that had protected dozens of families while dismantling a criminal enterprise that threatened the economic foundation of immigrant neighborhoods throughout New York City. Maya accepted a commendation from the city, while thinking about her father's lessons regarding the responsibility that comes with knowledge and ability. She had used her skills to protect her adopted community, honoring his memory while building something positive from the ruins of Torino's criminal empire. Maya's transformation from hidden martial artist to public figure required adjustments that extended beyond professional recognition to include personal security measures that would govern her daily routine for the foreseeable future. FBI protection specialists had provided training in situational awareness, secure communications, and emergency procedures that reflected the reality of having testified against organized crime figures with long memories and patient planning capabilities. Maya understood that her safety depended on maintaining the vigilance that had served her well during the investigation. But she also recognized that fear couldn't be allowed to prevent her from living the kind of open, engaged life that made her work meaningful. The week concluded with Maya receiving notification that the federal government's Civil Rights Division had opened an investigation into the regulatory harassment that had targeted Golden Dragon and other victim businesses. The inquiry would examine whether ICE and health department officials had been corrupted by Torino's organization or had simply been manipulated through false reports and misleading information. Maya's documentation of the bureaucratic retaliation had provided evidence that government agencies could be weaponized against vulnerable communities, leading to policy changes designed to prevent similar abuse in future cases involving organized crime and immigration enforcement. 6 months after Anthony Torino's sentencing, Maya Chen stood in the kitchen of the newly expanded Golden Dragon, watching Mr. Wang teach his grandson how to fold dumplings with the patient precision that came from 50 years of practice. The restaurant had been transformed by federal restitution payments into something that honored both tradition and possibility. Hand-painted murals depicting scenes from Taiwan covered walls that had once displayed generic motivational posters, while modern kitchen equipment hummed behind glass partitions that allowed customers to observe the artistry of professional cooking. Maya had traded her waitress uniform for business attire that reflected her new role as director of the Queens Community Protection Initiative. But she still spent Tuesday evenings helping with dinner service and maintaining connections to the place that had shaped her transformation from hidden observer to public advocate. The community had changed in ways both visible and subtle since the federal prosecutions concluded. Northern Boulevard businesses displayed security cameras and alarm systems purchased with restitution funds. But more importantly, they operated with the kind of confidence that came from knowing that criminal organizations couldn't exploit government agencies to harass legitimate enterprises. Maya observed the difference during her weekly walks through neighborhoods that had once lived under the shadow of systematic intimidation. Shop owners greeted customers with genuine warmth rather than nervous vigilance. Employees discussed career advancement rather than survival strategies, and families made long-term plans that included business expansion and educational investment. Maya's work with the FBI had evolved beyond consulting on financial crimes to include training programs that taught small business owners how to recognize and report sophisticated protection rackets before they became entrenched in community networks. She traveled throughout New York State delivering presentations to immigrant business associations, community development organizations, and law enforcement agencies that needed to understand how organized crime had adapted to exploit regulatory compliance requirements and bureaucratic complexity. The work provided intellectual challenge and meaningful impact, while allowing Maya to remain connected to the Queens neighborhoods that had become her home. The personal costs of her investigation had been significant but manageable through careful planning and community support that extended far beyond official protection programs. Maya had relocated from Elmhurst to a secure apartment in Astoria, trading her studio for a one-bedroom unit with updated security systems and proximity to federal agents who monitored her safety as part of ongoing witness protection protocols. Her social life required adjustments that reflected the reality of having testified against organized crime figures who might harbor long-term revenge fantasies. But Maya had learned to balance reasonable caution with the kind of normal relationships that made life worth protecting. Detective Luis Rodriguez had become something more than a professional contact during the months following Torino's arrest. Their shared commitment to community protection evolving into friendship and eventually romance that surprised Maya with its naturalness and depth. Rodriguez understood the unique pressures that came with law enforcement work in immigrant communities, the delicate balance between investigation and advocacy that characterized effective police work in neighborhoods where residents had complex relationships with official authority. Their Tuesday evening dinners at Golden Dragon had become community institutions, visible symbols of cooperation between law enforcement and the businesses they served. Maya's relationship with her past had also undergone transformation as she integrated martial arts training back into her daily routine without the secrecy that had once seemed necessary for survival. She taught self-defense classes at the Queens Community Center, sharing skills with women who faced the same vulnerabilities that had once driven her into hiding. The classes attracted participants from across the borough's immigrant communities: domestic workers, restaurant employees, shop clerks, and students who needed both physical confidence and practical knowledge about personal safety in urban environments. Maya found satisfaction in teaching techniques that her father had passed to her, continuing a tradition of protection while adapting it to serve new purposes. The symbolic moment Maya had been anticipating arrived on a Thursday evening in early December, when Mr. Wang invited her to join his family for dinner in the private dining room behind Golden Dragon's kitchen. The meal included dishes that required hours of preparation: hand-pulled noodles made from dough that had been kneaded that morning, dumplings filled with pork and vegetables grown in the community garden that had been established with federal grant money, tea brewed from leaves that Mr. Wang's sister sent from Taiwan every month. Maya brought her father's chopsticks, the wooden implements that had accompanied every significant meal of her adult life, providing continuity and connection across years of change and challenge. Mr. Wang had prepared his own gift for the occasion. A new set of chopsticks carved from bamboo that had been grown in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, harvested with permission from the Parks Department, and shaped using traditional techniques that Mr. Wang had learned from his own father decades earlier in Taiwan. The chopsticks were lighter than Maya's inherited pair, but balanced with the same careful attention to proportion and utility that characterized all well-made tools. "For my daughter of choice," Mr. Wang said as he presented them in a lacquered box lined with red silk. "The old chopsticks honor your father's memory, but these represent your future in our family and community." Maya accepted the gift with emotions that surprised her. Gratitude for recognition she hadn't realized she needed. Relief at belonging somewhere after years of careful isolation, and joy at connections that had survived the stress of investigation and testimony to become something stronger than circumstance. She placed her father's chopsticks beside Mr. Wang's gift on the table, two sets of implements that represented different chapters of the same story about protection, community, and the ways that ordinary objects could carry extraordinary significance across generations and cultures. The dinner conversation ranged from practical matters, the community garden's spring planting schedule, upcoming changes to immigration law that might affect local businesses, Maya's travel schedule for FBI training programs, to philosophical topics about justice, family, and the responsibilities that came with knowledge and ability. Mr. Wang's grandson listened with the focused attention of someone learning important lessons about citizenship and community engagement, asking questions that demonstrated his understanding of how individual choices could affect entire neighborhoods. Maya recognized in him the same curiosity and moral seriousness that had driven her own investigation, qualities that suggested the next generation would continue building on foundations established through sacrifice and courage. The evening concluded with Maya walking through Queens neighborhoods that had been transformed by her investigation, observing changes that extended beyond improved security to include fundamental shifts in community confidence and economic opportunity. New businesses had opened along Northern Boulevard, taking advantage of reduced criminal taxation and increased customer traffic that came with improved safety. Existing enterprises had expanded their operations, hiring additional employees and investing in equipment that reflected optimism about future profitability. Maya calculated that federal restitution payments had generated multiplier effects worth several $1 million in economic activity, demonstrating how law enforcement success could create prosperity that benefited entire communities. Maya's apartment in Astoria had become a different kind of sanctuary than her previous studio, larger and more secure, but also more open to the relationships and responsibilities that had emerged from her work as a federal witness and community advocate. The walls displayed commendations from law enforcement agencies, photographs from community events, and her father's martial arts certificates alongside her NYU accounting degree. The kitchen table where she had once planned her investigation of Torino's organization now served for FBI consulting work, community meeting preparation, and dinner parties that included federal agents, local business owners, and neighbors who had become friends rather than simply people who lived nearby. The final scene Maya had envisioned throughout her investigation finally materialized on a Saturday morning in late December, when she sat at her kitchen table with both sets of chopsticks beside her laptop, working on a federal training manual about financial crime investigation techniques that would be distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the Northeast. The work combined her forensic accounting expertise with practical lessons learned during the Torino investigation, creating resources that would help other communities identify and respond to sophisticated protection rackets before they became entrenched criminal enterprises. Maya paused in her writing to hold her father's chopsticks, feeling their familiar weight while considering how his lessons about patience, observation, and strategic thinking had guided her through challenges he could never have anticipated. The wooden implements had carried her through years of hiding, investigation, testimony, and recovery, providing constant reminders about the importance of dignity, courage, and community protection. Now they rested beside Mr. Wang's gift, 2 generations of wisdom supporting work that would protect future generations from criminals who mistook sophistication for invincibility. Outside her window, Queens awakened to another day of legitimate commerce, honest work, and families building futures without the shadow of systematic intimidation. Maya returned to her writing with the satisfaction of someone who had kept promises to both the living and the dead, using skills inherited from her father to protect communities that had become her chosen family. The waitress who had once hidden her abilities behind careful invisibility had become a federal consultant, community advocate, and teacher whose work would ripple through law enforcement agencies and immigrant neighborhoods for decades to come. Maya Chen had finally come home to herself, and her father's chopsticks had guided her every step of the way.